She's bundled up.
Hi, Joy, I'm gonna.
All right,
We're going.
Okay. All right. I will call to order the Monday, March 14th meeting of the 2022 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. Before I begin, I'm going to do a quick roll call just so we can keep track of who is here. From left to right is the only purpose to this order. Commissioner Stoll.
Present.
Commissioner West.
Here.
Myself. Chair Schlagenhofer is here. Commissioner Mitchell. Here. Commissioner Staggs. Present. And Commissioner LaSalle.
Here.
All right. Okay, before we begin, are there any public comments that have shown up on items not on the agenda? Okay. All right. We go straight into our agenda for tonight. The first one is a discussion. It is the Oregon City Economic Development Strategic Plan, and I believe it's an executive summary, and I believe this is going to be introduced by Mr. James Graham.
Well, first of all, let me say how nice it is to see your faces. It feels kind of strange without a mask, but I'm sure we'll get used to it. The information we're going to present to you is for informational purposes only, but we do welcome ideas. Always, we welcome ideas. This strategic plan complements, we believe, the OC 2020 Comprehensive Plan. And that, like most strategic plans, this is simply a blueprint as to our aspirations within the next 5 years. It is not a step-by-step approach. And the implementation is left afterwards by staff. But it is an aspirational document. Matter of fact, we are already implementing certain aspects of this plan. Also joining me in making this presentation is Ann Griffin, who is the Economic Development Coordinator with our division, with our department. So let us begin here, and we'll start with the fact that there is a vision associated with this plan. The agenda, we start with the vision, then we'll do an assessment of the economy. Just like any physician, we see ourselves as physicians, and Oregon City is the patient. And we review and examine the symptoms of the patient in terms of how well it's doing, or if it's not doing well at all. We will do an overview of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats associated with the strategic plan. And we'll look at take a look at the primary economic development strategies that are contained within this document. And then, of course, we'll have some discussion and some ideas. But this is for informational purposes only. Now, the definition of economic development, I'll share that with you before we start. And this definition we have used for about 34 years. And it has served us well over those years. And it reads as such: economic development is a strategic and collaborative process that creates an environment that systemically supports new investment, creates and or retains jobs, and broadens the tax base, therefore improving the quality of life of people. And that's the definition we have been working on. The vision associated with this plan recognizes three words: vibrancy, a diversified economy, and resiliency. So by 2027, Oregon City has a robust, resilient, and diversified economy. Residents live, work, and play while having access to multiple amenities within the region. Businesses flourish due to a business-friendly environment that supports for-profit enterprise and nurtures private nonprofit entities. For anyone who seeks employment, investments made by nonprofits and for-profit organizations provide opportunities for upward mobility through job creation and technical skill training. Next slide, yes. Now, in terms of our economy, as you can see, our economy has a variety of different industries. However, the largest industry represented in terms of employment happens to be the public sector or public administration. And it's important that we have a diversified economy. But if you have too many of your population employed by public sector, that could be problematic, because a growing local economy doesn't depend on a growing public sector. But a stable public sector depends on a growing private sector. So we have to be careful about growing our public sector too large, but it is still an important player in the overall economy. Next slide, please. As of 2020, our unemployment rate was 6.7%. And as of September 2021, it dipped to 4%. And then as of October 2021, our local economy dipped to 3.3%. So we came out of this COVID environment pretty good. Although the overall state unemployment is still stuck at 4.3%, and it has been that for a couple of months. The household income of Clackamas County is larger than Oregon City's. Clackamas County is at $76,597, and Oregon City stands at $71,856. And then Oregon, as a state, both the city and the county outpaces the state overall in terms of household income. In terms of our other aspects of our economy, we are growing at a steady, little over 1% annually. The city has a diverse economy, but it is not diverse enough. Small businesses have on average 10 or fewer employees. Now, income is growing, income in Oregon is growing, and the largest classification, as I mentioned before, is public service. Next slide, please. Our SWOT analysis, just like any physician would do in terms of the patient, we look at what ails them and what's good for them and what is difficult for them. Oregon City has a good location. It is close enough to Portland and other growing communities. It's also far enough away from Portland and other communities. Transportation, our transportation network is actually very good. You can get goods and services out of Oregon City to other aspects, other areas of the country pretty easily. The cost of doing business on average is actually less in Oregon City than in other places like Portland and other places north. Weaknesses. We do not have large parcels of land. It's almost once every 2 weeks I get a call from a developer seeking 15 acres or more. We don't have that. And if we're ever to grow our economy for primary jobs, maybe larger employers, we're going to need that. Because those manufacturers or even the small industrial businesses will not wait until we get our act together. They will just simply go someplace else. So we have to look at that, take a look at that, and do something about that at some point. And we also need flex space. On average, investors need 50,000 square feet. If we have an existing building, that's all the better. And that's what they're looking for. Opportunities. Next slide. Oh, yeah. Tourism and outdoor recreation. It's important that we attract new experiences. We have lots of restaurants, lots of places to eat, but people need experiences. Particularly, we have 3 market segments in our tourism strategy. Young people between the ages of 18 and 35 who are looking for outdoor experiences, venture, like to take advantage of our beautiful river and our landscape. People who are older, between the ages of 45 and maybe 60, baby boomers, they're looking for fine dining, shopping, safety. And people who are older, they're also looking for safety, primarily, but also a laid-back, non-rushed kind of environment. They would like to take their time and enjoy what Oregon City has to offer. The threats. Our downtown courthouse is pending relocation. And many individuals are very concerned about relocating the courthouse to another area within the city. Yes, it will still be in the city, but many businesses downtown are concerned about losing lawyers and other individuals who visit that courthouse. And so that's one of the threats. Another threat is the rising cost of development. We have to be very concerned about that, because if our costs become too expensive, it will dampen our development prospects. And that will be unfortunate for years to come if we don't watch that type of situation. Skilled labor is an issue, as you all know. There are lots of people who are having trouble reporting to work. And there are other people who don't want to report to work, and other people who just simply retired. We've had the great resignation. And a lot of young people have decided to do something else with their lives. Quite frankly, a lot of jobs in the American economy is quite crappy. And so therefore, they want something better to do. And so therefore, we are looking at that experience right now. It's not because the government paid them too much money. That's too easy. They lack childcare. They have had an epiphany about their lives that this pandemic has given them. And people really want something better for themselves. And I had mentioned childcare restraints. This is a very serious serious issue. Because if you don't invest in childcare, that's going to keep a lot of people from working. And when you invest in childcare, you actually not only help childcare facilities, but you help all industries, not just the childcare industry. And that's one of those situations that's kind of unique in that perspective. The perceptions about having a business-friendly environment is real. Everything that's perceived, unfortunately, in this particular business is real. And we've got to convey to our investors that we welcome them, we welcome their business, we will make our permitting processes predictable, and we will work with them in fulfilling their obligation and also to their stockholders as well as to the community. This is extremely important that we have a business-friendly perception. Next slide. Our primary strategies include business retention and expansion, business attraction, entrepreneurship, especially those startup industries between 1 to 3 years old, urban renewal, and tourism development. I will now turn this over to Ann Griffin. She'll give more detail on the following as we've mentioned them.
Well, good evening, and do feel free to interrupt if you have some questions. I know we're going through a lot of stuff fast in terms of our strategies and some of our milestones, so feel free to jump in. As James said, one of our primary strategies is business retention and expansion. It's kind of the bread and butter of your economic development department. We're meeting with businesses that are here and seeing what issues we can assist them with as they grow their local workforce. And in particular, we're interested in our target industry clusters. Our target industries include light manufacturing or metals manufacturing, distribution and logistics companies, and healthcare companies. And as we are looking at this year, 2022, some of our specific strategies will be meeting with target industry companies, and we'll be developing business outreach and information kits, and cataloging business needs and how we as a staff follow up and address those needs. The second goal under business retention and expansion is to support the development of a systemic skill training and job placement network. James talked about the great resignation and a lot of changes that are going on in our local workforce, as well as across the country. And we've come up with a strategy that we call Talent Ready, which is a systemic and comprehensive strategy that works with a variety of partners to help employers get the kind of skilled labor they need, and to help folks that are looking for employment or a change in employment, not only specific access to jobs, but other wraparound services that they might need if there's something in their way standing between them and pursuing an employment opportunity. some of our milestones within Talent Ready, we're going to be working with specific employers and developing job partnership agreements with some of the agencies that we work with that address those kind of wraparound services I mentioned. All of our collaborators within Talent Ready, the Clackamas Workforce Partnership, Clackamas County. We're blessed to have Clackamas Community College here. That's a wonderful resource for our community, as is Oregon State, the extension for the university. Important partners that we work with, all local employers, and also some of our nonprofit service agencies. James also mentioned the importance of the childcare industry. Some of we have goals related specifically to increasing the number of childcare opportunities for young children, particularly under the kindergarten age. So we are working to identify an additional childcare firms that may be interested in coming or expanding here in Oregon City. And we are also developing a forgivable loan program that will support childcare companies. One of the other goals is something that we call an Ombudsman Program, which is really a business advocacy program. James mentioned the issue of business friendliness, and so if you hear people say, oh, it takes so long to get a permit, oh, I got to wait for my inspection, depending on what the project is, we want to hear about that, and we want to be a proactive proponent for businesses as they're going through a development process as an active ombudsman. There's one other thing here, was establishing a brand new CRM database program is something that our organization has already implemented. And for business attraction, I'll turn it back to James.
We're in competition with a variety of cities, not only in the region, but of course within a multi-state region, and we have to recognize that. So by putting in place strategies and programs to attract businesses is important in terms of that competitive spirit. So therefore, it's important to know what we have available so that we can promote it. It's important to identify properties that can be developable, and it's also important for the city, and particularly the Urban Renewal Commission, if at some point it decides to go forward, to own property. Because what we have found, and I have found this in many cities across this country, that when you have few people owning a lot of property, it holds your community ransom. And it's very challenging. Because those properties, many times we have found that people are asking for money for the property that they can't support the price. And the developer is not going to pay that price. Yes, sir. You have a question?
I have several questions, but I was going to wait until
Okay. We are also establishing a new economic development website it'll be somewhat separate and apart from the city, although still in affiliation with the city government. But it needs to look more corporate. You need to be able to find things on it and be able to identify what applies to you if you're an investor. And so that's the intent there. And once again, I had mentioned the Urban Renewal District Plan. So we have to look at that, and we're working with the Urban Renewal Commission to update that plan. I will skip this one because I actually went right over it. And so I'm going to go to business. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ann, to entrepreneurship.
All righty. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about our strategies that we're putting in place to support the startup businesses in Oregon City. We're actively partnering with a couple of different organizations that provide technical assistance to businesses. One of them is called MISO, which is Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, and the Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which again provides technical assistance to manufacturing companies that helps them operate more efficiently and effectively. our milestone here will be developing partnership agreements that we're with a variety of different technical assistance providers. Oops. One of the things that we're also trying to do is look for opportunities for a small business procurement program. We, as a community, Oregon City spends a lot of money purchasing a variety of goods and services. We want to make sure that we're able to have those be as much locally sourced as it makes sense. So we'll be putting together program guidelines this year to support our small businesses and ones that they maybe don't make quite enough to sell, that they might not meet the city's needs, help them expand so that they could potentially be in that position in the future. We are also developing, in addition to the child care loan program, a small business growth and retention fund. This will be a loan people can borrow up to $20,000, and it's designed to be patient capital. So if you're a small business that's getting going, you can wait perhaps as much as up to 12 months before you have to make your first payment. All right, take us home, James, with urban renewal goals. Okay,
but before I go on to urban renewal, one item I failed to mention in terms of attraction is that we're working with a consultant to develop a feasibility study to look at our fiber optic connectivity in the city. It's extremely important that we have good connectivity for a variety of reasons. This virus has shown us that we can work from home, many of us, and many of us will be working from home, and the connectivity is extremely important that it works. And then, of course, it's always important when you have larger companies trying to do business over the internet that they're not impaired by infrastructure that's simply insufficient to do business. And the fiber optic technology is a plus on a variety of areas, particularly security, because it is very, very safe. Because if you wanted to tap into someone's internet connectivity, using fiber optics, you actually have to cut a lot of lines on purpose. And of course, when you do that, that's highly noticeable. So the fiber optic technology is extremely important to attracting companies and also helping people work from home. The urban renewal, yes. Urban renewal is, the Urban Renewal Commission has had a couple of retreats, and it will have a couple of more retreats before it's all said and done. But right now, it's developing its vision, it's developing its goals, and it's developing its framework for making decisions on projects. And that's extremely important because you have to do the proper due diligence on investment opportunities. And it's not a situation of first come, first serve anymore. When a developer comes forth that plan has to fit the Urban Renewal Commission's vision. And the Urban Renewal Commission also has its own properties that it wants to develop. And so therefore, we would be expecting developers to meet that want to utilize those properties to meet the vision of the Urban Renewal Commission. And they will be going through a set of exercises to determine whether or not the developers are capable of finishing the project, let alone funding it. Tourism. Oregon City's tourism industry is developing, it's evolving. It's a small industry. And it's important that we invest in the infrastructure in order to grow it. And so one of those important areas is that we have a network of stakeholders, both nonprofit as well as for-profit entities engaged in that discussion. One of the programs we have already started is the Concierge Institute. The Concierge Institute is really for both for-profit and nonprofit. However, we started off with the nonprofits, and that is the historic sites and the museums. And so there are several courses that they go through. For instance, merchandising, managing volunteers, fundraising, courses like that. After they finish those courses, then we meet with them to see how what resources we can invest, what resources we can provide to them in order for them to stay open on a schedule and to operate like a business. So we will be providing resources, our department will be providing resources directly to those historic sites and museums, whether or not it's volunteers from the local community college or the other universities in our region. We will be providing internships to students who are interested in this kind of work, who are interested in particularly hospitality. And there are lots of people who are interested in this kind of industry who are going to school. And internships mean a lot to them. So, and as well as some working capital. Some of these nonprofits need a little working capital so they can buy merchandise, so they can sell it, and start behaving like a business once again. Our brand for Oregon City's tourism is Oregon's hometown, welcome home. And in late April, hopefully, we will see banners all over the city that speaks to that slogan. And that will be the beginning of Oregon City's tourism season. We will use commercials, and you probably have seen some of them, or one of them at least, and more to come. We will be using digital media to also promote Oregon City. And we're talking about a big market. We're talking about 2.6 million people in this region that will see these commercials, that will be exposed to our digital marketing. And that will raise the specter and it'll raise the visibility of Oregon City to the whole region. And then we call that Destination Ready, and it has already started as of November 2021. We have a new website for tourism, and we just hired a new tourism program specialist, Daniel Gearing, and he's up and running, and he is actually a marketing IT guru, quite frankly. He's very good at what he does, and we are very fortunate to have his skills as we develop websites, as we develop digital marketing, and as we reach out to this 2.6 million people that we intend to reach out to. Increasing visitors' experiences. Our department intends to go outside of Oregon City, Clackamas County, I should say, and attract new businesses that provide experiences to our visitor. And there are lots of different types of businesses out there in the tourism industry that can provide those experiences. And so therefore, that's one of the initiatives that we will be implementing also. The arts are important to an economy, particularly like ours. It attracts individuals who are considered high dollar consumers. It brings restaurants and tourism together. It brings people of diverse backgrounds and diverse ideas together. That's what the art does. And we will be in, and we already have established the Oregon City Arts Commission. And I think they've had 3 meetings so far. And their first mural will be coming up. So this is another way we're bringing murals back to Oregon City. And so hopefully in the next year or so, you'll see more murals in Oregon City and also more support of the arts. So that's our presentation on the strategic plan. This is the first strategic plan in Oregon City's history that is implemented. There have been other strategic plans, truly, but this is the first one that has been implemented. The tourism plan also has been on the shelf since 2017, and we've just decided to implement it. And so you're seeing the culmination of all of that. We are welcome to hear your questions and your ideas.
Thank you very much, James and Ann. I do have a couple questions, but I wanted to see who else had questions before I went. I think Chris? first.
I'll throw mine out there. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your kind of articulating where we are right now with with our vision for the future. I think the one question that I want to bring up relates to I think it's on page 6 of the plan, and one of the points there, it says that we are perceived as not being a business-friendly city. And I'm wondering if you could expand on why you think that is, and what we could do to change that perception.
I'm glad you asked me that question, because I have actually observed customers when they're not pleased with certain aspects of city services. I've witnessed it when they've expressed displeasure, and they have made the complaint, and I've witnessed that too. And I actually chased them out. When they left the building, I actually chased behind them, ran behind them, and asked them what their experiences was like. And I do that routinely. So I know that from my discussions with the contractors when they come to City Hall, that they say that. One of the main complaints that they make is that they don't get advance notice as to what they must do with their projects. And it's not explained to them in simple, everyday words. And they are concerned that it's their explanations are much too technical and unyielding. So that's what I mean by not having a business-friendly, the perception of not having a business-friendly environment. The customer has to be served where the customer is, where he's at. And you can't, and so that's extremely important. What we should do in terms of helping our customer is actually take a look at our regulations first. Some of them are old as 1976. Why they exist, I don't know. But we should take a look at some of those things and get rid of some of those things that simply are not relevant anymore in a modern economy. And number two, we should develop teaching material to help the customer know it beforehand, before they come to City Hall or whatever, one of these buildings that we're in, to find out what's going on with what they must do with their project. Now, yes, I'm sure that various departments have had courses, or not courses, but meetings where one would invite a developer, but the question, or an investor, but they don't seem to attend. So we have to meet them where they are and sort of go the extra mile to engage them, and so that their projects can go forward, and the regulatory process is more predictable for them. It's not predictable for them. So that's why we introduced the idea of an Ombudsman Program, whereby it's designed to teach, to educate, and to work with the various departments on regulatory issues. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but that's the answer.
Yeah, I'd like to just, thank you. My personal feeling is that, just generally speaking, I think the city needs to be more, not sort of a day-to-day business-friendly, like walk into Starbucks and get great service, or go into a restaurant and great service. But my perception is that we're not a business-friendly city from a bigger perspective of being able to actually get things done on a bigger scale, a bigger level. And I think that would be something that would be a positive development for our economic development as a city, is to be a more friendly place for big ideas and big things to happen. I could go through half a dozen things where I think big things could happen, but I just want to also, so I think it's a bigger question, not just about going into Starbucks and getting great service, or being in a specific business. So I think broadening our vision about the city in terms of what are the big things that could happen here. And I don't say that just from a perspective like because I just want to do big things all the time, but cities that grow and prosper and become really interesting places for the 2.6 million people to come and visit and come here and shop and go to restaurants and do things here in Oregon City. I think what attracts that is a very friendly culture and climate to those things happening. And I'll just say also that I think the city has a couple of really amazing pieces of property that fit your category of big pieces of land to do amazing things. And that is the Blue Heron paper mill, which we know is evolving and becoming something. And then there's the property by Home Depot where the driving range is, which is currently being considered. And there's a development plan for that and some ideas for that, which I'm not sure what the current status of that is. But, those two properties kind of are like if amazing things could happen in those two properties and you have everything in between in downtown Oregon City, I mean, those are huge opportunities, I think, for the city to economically develop. And I think we should be doing as much as we can vigorously and energetically to make those two properties successful as soon as possible.
Is Mike ready?
Who's next? Commissioner LaSalle.
Oh, okay.
Well, first I'd like to congratulate you on putting together a plan of action that actually establishes goals that make sense and are achievable. Lack that in Oregon City for some time. And, oh, I'm sorry.
Do I need to start over? Congratulations on a good job. Well done on putting together a good plan. On page 2 of the Oregon City staff report, action versus planning is vital to create strategies that will actually be implemented. Again, bravo for that. And the next one, flexibility versus rigidity, recognizes that you can change strategies that are not resulting in expected outcomes. Please keep that in mind, that so many times we get stuck in a rut. We're unwilling to admit our mistakes. If something isn't working, there's a reason and a solution to it. Now, I do have a question on the murals. How did you get around the problem of offensive context?
Carefully.
We might not have.
Legal counsel is here. Carefully.
Carefully.
Well, there are processes in place to assure that we're in compliance with Oregon's very unique version of freedom of speech. It's very different, and it's much more stringent than the United States laws as it relates to freedom of speech. It's much more stringent. So there are processes in place so that we can recognize someone's ability to have a freedom to speak, but at the same time recognize that there's a responsibility that goes with freedom of speech. That's the best I can do at the moment.
Thank you.
Commissioner West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Graham and Ann, for a very thorough and detailed report. It was really very interesting to read. So some of my comments sort of piggyback on what Commissioner Stagg said, in that after reading the whole thing, I understand how you kind of laid out your report, but that no mention was made of the Blue Heron site or the landfill and the opportunities. And the Cove area. The other thing about it is the housing component. When I think of recruiting new employers and growing this community, there was not very much mention of any kind of housing. The only housing I read in there was just doing a couple upper floors downtown Main Street, which I found kind of disappointing. I was hoping, at one point, Main Street, we were looking at all sorts of mixed-use developments. So that was just a comment, and I like what you're doing, the quiet zone, all that, those are good things to do downtown. And the other thing about redeveloping the Cove, the landfill, or Main Street, or Blue Heron, is does it all have to be urban renewal funded? So that might be another reason for calling it out, because can't people build without using urban renewal?
To answer your question, certain projects are just so expensive, and elements of those projects are undesirable for investors to invest. For instance, give you an example. A lot of people feel strongly about parking, but very few businesses would invest in a parking lot because of its expense, and the rate of return on it is very little. So they would not want to expend their funding on parking lots. The same thing is true with the property that you have mentioned. It is a place where there's a lot of trash that's been dumped there.
Well, yeah, on the landfill.
And of course, it's going to be very expensive to mitigate that and to build on top of it. And most private investors would not want to utilize their money to do that. So they would look to the public sector to do something like that.
Yeah, well, I agree with that on the landfill and things. I just thought Main Street might be another opportunity. So thank you. It was a really good report, really detailed.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank you. I think the point is a good one that you make about housing. When we look at the big issues that are affecting our whole region, not only is childcare a big issue, but the lack of affordable housing throughout the region is an important issue. So that's a very good point.
I also serve on the board of the Downtown Oregon City Association, and in that role, I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Graham a couple of weeks ago on this plan, and I thank you again for taking your time to do that and for being here tonight. And I'll just very briefly reiterate a couple of the concerns that I brought up. Number one, the first thing I did when I got a copy of this plan was I looked at who was on the committee. The CEO of the Chamber of Commerce was on the committee, but outside of that, there was no other representation from the Oregon City business community. DOCA was not representative. The Oregon City Business Alliance wasn't representative. No owners or operators of businesses in Oregon City were on that committee. And that seems to me that it would have been important. The other thing, there's a great deal of demographic information in here, and I think that's terrific. But what I was hoping to see was some survey results of Oregon City businesses. What challenges do you face? What obstacles to growing your business? And I know there's a lot more to an economic development plan than just existing businesses, but the old business adage, it's easier to grow the customers that you already have than get new ones. So paying attention to what the needs are of Oregon City businesses, I was hoping that there would have been some of that kind of information here. So I guess basically, I think this is a very good economic development plan. And you can tell that it reflects your years of experience. But to me, it doesn't read like an Oregon City economic development plan.
And those are fair comments. In regard to surveys, we actually did, with regard to childcare and certain programs, we did actually talk to childcare providers to see whether or not what we could do to help them. And we did surveys for that. The fiber optic technology piece will be the business community as well as individual households as well as big users of data, will be part of that feasibility study, and they will have an opportunity to have input in the survey to determine the market demand for what we want to do. In terms of DOCA serving on the strategic committee and other businesses, and particularly other businesses, you, as a public, as someone who's works in the public sector, you always have to be careful of engaging the business community in a way that's unfair to other people in the business community. In other words, if you ask a business or two to be on a committee and there's a revolving loan fund that the committee is discussing, that business can't participate in a loan if they need it because it's conflict of interest. So and on top of that, you had a lot of individuals and entities on that committee that help businesses every day. That's their job. And we had two state economists that did a lot of research on behalf of Oregon City where that data was reflected from. So it's not a right or wrong answer to the question or to response. It's just the way we decided to do it. And I think that we did it the right way.
I think we'll agree to disagree on that.
Sorry, Commissioner Stoll, did you have anything? Okay.
Already been asked.
All right. That happens sometimes. Okay, thank you, James. Ann?
I got a couple things I'd like to add, sorry. Just 5 minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay? All right, sorry.
No.
I wanted to kind of follow up on a couple things. One is on the landfill site. While it is true that is basically a landfill, and we know it's going to cost millions of dollars to convert it into a place that can be developed. Nonetheless, it is a huge piece of property that is developable and I think is a huge opportunity for the city. And one question I wanted to ask in relation to that, and I'm sorry, I don't know the current status of that application, but I do know that there's been some discussion and or application or request for urban renewal. And Christine, maybe you can help me with this. I'm not sure, I'm not up to date on this, or whoever knows in the room, what is the current status of the urban renewal funds in relation to that particular development? I thought that there was some application or request for the city to participate in that development in some way, fiscally. And we don't need to necessarily discuss it tonight, but I think that is something, if we have the urban renewal funding to help that development become a reality, I believe it's something that we should consider in a very serious way. And I know there's an urban renewal commission and there are commissioners on that urban renewal. But I think as, since we're here talking about the economic development of the city and the future of the city, and we have this amazing piece of property that's developable, and we have these funds available, then it seems to make sense that we would, if we're proposing to systemically promote development in the city in the way that this plan suggests, that seems to be a logical way we can do that. So I wanted to just kind of articulate that. I think it's appropriate to talk about that tonight based on what we're discussing. And if we have the ability, we have several properties between the landfill site and the Blue Heron site, a couple that I know of off the top of my head, that could be developed. They could be, the city could participate and team up with developers to develop mixed-use places along Main Street between the landfill site and the Blue Heron site, and make that entire corridor just this amazing place of business and do all the things that we're talking about in this in this plan. And I think there's immediate opportunities today using funds that we have available to us today to make that stuff happen. We could do RFPs for developers, for properties on Main Street and develop some of these vacant pieces of property. I know there's also the market demand. There's that market demand question. Is there a market demand for that stuff? And I know there's been several studies done over the past several years that talk about that. So I'm excited about what Oregon City can do. And I think we have all the tools to do it, but I think we have to have the will of the city and the city commissioners and council and the people, all of us together collectively to make that stuff happen.
Want to give a one or two sentence response to the current status of the...
I can do that. I don't want to get ahead of the Urban Renewal Commission. So what I can say is that, and of course in economic development, it's like working in a situation where you know stuff, but you can't say a lot because you don't want to jeopardize the confidentiality of parties involved in discussion. So $130 million doesn't go as far as it used to. That's the first thing. Number two, the Urban Renewal Commission is going through a strategy of its own, a vision, a framework for decision-making. It's going to update its plan. So there are a lot of steps that they're going to have to go through in order to finally make a decision as to the future of urban renewal. So in that process, they've decided to take a lot of their property and a lot of their input off the market until they have finished that process. And so that's where they are right now. They're doing their own due diligence so that they can make decisions based on a vision and based on a framework.
I do want to agree with you, though. I think I've been in the economic development business for a long time, but a staff person for Oregon City only for about a year. And I am very excited about the opportunities that you mentioned, Commissioner Staggs. This is a very pivotal time for our community, and I share your excitement.
Read to talk. Okay. I wanted to touch on a couple things that the other commissioners brought up. Commissioner Mitchell, you mentioned that it doesn't sound like an Oregon City plan, and I agree. But what I do think is James has been in several states and cities across the country, so he brings an outside perspective in. It may not fit our city perfectly, but I think outside views can be helpful. Not in all cases. I don't think everything's going to fit, but I do think that some of the things he's seeing and observing, I think they can be beneficial to our city. Commissioner Staggs, as far as being business friendly, we seem to have some kind of a reputation. I was in Malala, I was picking up my taxes, I was talking to the accountant, and one of the accountants there was saying that she was trying to open up a coffee shop. And she mentioned the cities that she wanted to open it up in, and it didn't include Oregon City. She mentioned Malala and Canby and I think Woodburn. And I said, well, what about Oregon City? And she said, well, Oregon City can be difficult. But she didn't use those words. She said something else I can't say. So somehow we need to improve that. I think people they feel like they're going to get so much red tape and run around that they just go somewhere that doesn't give them as much of a difficult experience. A coffee shop's a pretty basic one. I'm not talking about a huge mixed-use building, but I'm sure that the reputation, it must exist on all levels of development. So somehow we can fix that. I don't know if we're ever going to be really receptive to all development because we do have a lot of historic qualities. We're not going to want god-awful looking projects in our city, so not everything's going to be accepted. But something we could do would just be maybe make smaller projects a little easier to navigate through, where it seems like everybody gets stuck in the same channels, and they're not easy for smaller businesses. So maybe we'd have like a gradual slope of complication, you know, until we get to the big ones where you need consultants. And what did Commissioner West have? Oh, yeah, okay. As far as a large mixed-use project that was happening on Main Street, some of the older buildings, they're not the greatest. Do we have any zoning restrictions that are preventing that from happening, or is zoning good? It's just nobody wants to spend the money.
Well, it's expensive, especially when you're trying to retrofit a building for earthquakes.
Yeah.
That's a very expensive proposition, and that has to be done for some of the buildings that could be second-story residences. The quiet zone is extremely important to that as well. Having that train go through quietly, or as quietly as possible, will help living downtown. So it's not, the answer to that question is not that simple, but it's a combination of things.
Okay. All right, then my last question is on page 29 of, I guess it's the plan, worker inflow and outflow. It looks like it's close. The number of people that leave the city and the number of people that come to the city to work, it's within, 1,700 on, so we got 13,033 that work in Oregon City that live outside, and we have 14,791 that live, in the selected area. So I'm going to guess that is within that border. I'm not quite sure, that are employed outside. How does that compare to other cities you've seen and worked with? Do we have more people leaving town to try to find wages that can pay for living in Oregon City, or are we better? Are we worse? How do we look?
Well, it's a very interesting dichotomy. It's a very interesting look, because as you're right, you have just as many people leaving to go to work as you do
It's a lot of traffic.
There's a lot going on, and keep in mind, it's the topography that has a great deal to do with it, because you have other little cities and other little communities around us, and some of those communities actually pay more than others.
So are wages part of the reason people leave?
Wages is one of them. It's not the only reason.
Okay.
But the other big reason is some people do live on the outside of Oregon City to come to work. There are a lot of people who own businesses in Oregon City that do not live here. So, and you have a lot of people who have that kind of investment in Oregon City that do not live in Oregon City. So it's a reflection of investment choices and work choices that you're looking at. And also the fact that you have so many communities nearby that lend to that. A lot of people go to Portland, as you could honestly guess. But this is an opportunity, actually, because a lot of people who travel in their cars to go elsewhere would love to stay home and go to work. I see this as an opportunity. And this is why fiber optics makes so much sense. This is why it makes so much sense to look at growing our urban growth boundary and to annex into that so that you can provide more employment opportunity in those areas. Yes, it will take years, but you got to start sometime. But you're just looking at a situation where people are going places where they can be paid more, and also other situations where people have invested in Oregon City, but they live somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have anything else for Mr. Graham or Ms. Griffin?
I have one last comment.
Okay.
If I could. I think it might be interesting to think about what are some big vision things that we could do. I mean, Oregon City is an amazing location, right? We're the first city in Oregon. We're in this amazing location at the 205 and the 213. Everyone lives in Molalla and Canby, come down here to go to other places. We just have sort of like the formula this geographic location to be a pretty amazing place, but we're just not. I mean, I love Oregon City. I live here, I work here, my business is here. I am personally developing property here. I moved here because I think Oregon City has amazing potential. And it just feels like we're not taking advantage of that potential. And I guess one thing to think about is the best way to make progress, and I'm going to use the phrase as quickly as possible because I personally am not getting younger, and none of us are, so why would we wait? Why would we take our time to do it when we could do it? I mean, in China, they can build a high-speed rail network in the entire country in 5 years. I know that's China. There's a lot of differences between our country and their country, but the point is, with the will, you can do amazing things, and it doesn't have to take decades to do it. But I think one interesting question we could ask ourselves is it better to develop big vision ideas, or is it better to develop a bunch of little things? And I don't know the answer to that question. But I think it's an interesting question for us to ask as we kind of launch into this economic development plan. And maybe it's a combination of a couple of big things and a bunch of little things in the way we use the urban renewal funding that we do have. But it just feels to me like we're just not being as active and as vibrant and as we're not doing enough quickly enough. So that's my personal opinion, and I think those are interesting questions kind of to consider.
I'll just say real quick, in response to your question about mixed-use zoning, there are things in our mixed-use code that make it difficult or impossible to build projects and get them financed. But I think that's a part of our discussion that we're going to have in our last item on the agenda tonight when we talk about the middle housing. I've got some notes I want to bring up.
Okay, great.
There are issues.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you again. Is there anything, do you need anything official from us? Any direction, or was this more of a presentation so we know what's happening?
Well, your ideas and your opinions are important because Oregon City is only but so big, a little place. And the important thing to keep in mind that if it's ever to grow and to attract primary jobs, it's going to have to look into its urban growth area to grow. It's too small. And then there also, there's land that's underutilized within the boundary. So it's important to take a look at the entire landscape and just recognize some important facts. It's a small place. It's got to grow in urban. It has to expand if it ever to see its future, and it has to have a vision for its future so that it can take advantage of an economy that's constantly evolving, and we're in constant competition with others. You're not in this region by yourself. You're competing with everybody else. And so that's just a fact. But thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Then I believe we can move on. Okay. Agenda item number 2 is, it's a public hearing. It is GLUA-21-000069, a general land use application with MP, I believe that stands for minor partition, 21-00006, and a variance 21-00007. It's a quasi-judicial hearing, so I need to start with our quasi-judicial script. And it's a hybrid for the people out watching us virtually. Okay. One public hearing on land use applications is scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the Planning Commissioners whether they have any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the Planning Commissioners have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any Planning Commissioner about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Planning Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the Planning Commission website and on the wall to the north of me, which nobody virtually can see. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was requested in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are others in the audience who would like to participate. For the public record, please begin all testimonies stating your name and city of residence. If you'd like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please state your mailing address or email address. Testimony and evidence should be directed towards the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for consideration of City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes any action for damages in circuit court. Now, we will open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA-21-00069, General Land Use Application, and MP21-00006, Minor Partition, and VAR 21-00007 of Variance. We'll now ask each planning commissioner if they have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare, or have visited the site. If there was a site visit, the planning commissioner must declare what he or she perceived. I'll start to my left. Commissioner Stoll.
No conflicts of interest, no ex parte contact. I did drive by this afternoon. Looked like an old house that had been added onto. That's all I really interpreted from it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner West.
I have no conflicts of interest, no bias, no ex parte contact, but I did drive by today. I wanted to see the tree that was where it was located on the property. I wanted to see how the garage opened up and it wasn't to the alley. and I wanted to see how the houses were. The picture in the papers, or in our files here, didn't show the breezeway as readily as when you go, and you can see that they are two separate houses connected by, so that's all.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Mitchell?
No ex parte contacts, no conflict of interest. I did visit the site. I was looking, as Commissioner West said, I was looking to see what the situation was with the breezeway, and I wanted to see how the two houses were related to each other and how they both related to the surrounding houses. And it was a little unusual with that breezeway. I guess that if you want to know anything that I found, I found that to be unusual, but that's the only real thing I learned from it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Commissioner Staggs?
I have no conflict of interest, no ex parte contact, and I did not see the site.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner LaSalle?
I drove by the site, and I have nothing else to declare.
Okay, thank you. And then as for myself, no ex parte contact, no conflicts of interest. Oh, shoot, what's the last one? No bias. And unfortunately, I did not visit the site, but I looked as much as I could with Google and Google Street View to try to get a feeling of how it looks from the street. And it does look a little strange, but there's other strange developments in Oregon City, so I can't say it's the most unusual thing I've seen, but it is a little bit unusual. All right. Now, is there anyone in the audience that would like to question any of the commissioners on their statements? Is there anyone virtually watching the meeting? Are there any participants, any public? No. Do we have any public comments? I don't have any comment cards. Okay, all right.
Looks like the applicant briefly been
Okay, all right.
virtually present.
Okay, just seeing who we have here. Okay. I guess we will start with the planning staff report, and I think this is Diliana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diliana Vasilieva. I'll be presenting the staff report for this application, which is a minor partition with a variance to lot depth and rear yard setbacks. The subject site is located at the corner of 10th and Jefferson. It is approximately 6,500 square feet in size. It is zoned R3.5, which is a medium-density residential district, and surrounding properties are also zoned R3.5 and R6, shown in yellow on the map there, and generally include residential development. So the property is developed with 2 units. There is a historic home which faces 10th Street and is in the upper left corner there. That is the Frederick White House, which was built in 1892, and then behind it, facing Jefferson Street, is an addition that was built around 1950. And the entire property is within the McLaughlin Conservation District, and the entire property is a designated historic landmark, so both units. With this application, that the applicant is proposing to divide the property into 2 parcels, approximately 3,000 and 3,500 square feet respectively. No physical changes are proposed on site, and originally there was an application to reduce the historic landmark boundary to only apply to the historic home that faces 10th Street and not the second parcel. But that application has been withdrawn by the applicant. So regardless of your decision tonight, both units will obviously continue to be in the historic district, and the entire property, both units, will continue to be designated historic landmarks. proposed land division does change the unit type that is on site. Right now, the structure is considered a duplex because it is 2 attached units located on the same lot. With the land division, it would create a single-family attached development because even though the 2 units still would be attached, they would each be on their own lot. And I've included the 2 definitions in our code there. So a duplex would be 2 attached units on one lot, and single-family attached is attached units, but they're each on their own lot. The proposed configuration is not in compliance with some of the dimensional standards in our code. And for that reason, the following variances are being requested. The first is a variance to lot depth for parcel 1. Our code requires 70 feet for lot depth, and only about 60 feet is being provided. A variance to lot depth for parcel 2 is also requested. So again, our code requires 70 feet, and only about 50 feet is proposed for parcel 2. And a variance to the rear yard setback for parcel 2 is also being requested. Our code requires a 20-foot rear yard setback, and the applicant is providing an approximately 13 foot or a little over 13 feet for the rear yard. And these variance requests are the reason that the application is before you tonight. So again, as with any application, a variance can be granted provided that the applicable variance criteria are met. And I'll briefly go through each of the variance criteria. So the first is that the variance from the requirements is not likely to cause substantial damage to adjacent properties by reducing light, air, safe access, or other desirable or necessary qualities. Again, no physical changes are proposed to the property. So, to any neighbors or someone walking by, the property would look the exact same. Only a property line is being proposed. So the proposal is unlikely to have any significant impact on the adjacent properties, since nothing is physically changing. As with any application, we have provided a public notice, and we haven't received any comments from adjacent properties indicating that the proposal will cause any damage to their properties. The second criterion is that the request is the minimum variance that would alleviate the hardship. In this case, the hardship is kind of the existing siding and the existing layout of the units. The property line has to be, at the common wall between the 2 units, because neither the building code or planning would allow a property line that runs through a unit. So there's very little flexibility for where they can place that property line. And the applicant is asking for the minimum variance required to alleviate that. The next variance criteria is that granting the variance will equal or exceed the purpose of the regulation being modified. For the 2 variances to lot depth, the purpose of lot depth is generally to ensure adequate buildable area and adequate backyard space, as well as uniform lots within a neighborhood that are kind of consistently shaped. So the buildable area and backyard space is especially important on vacant lots because we want to make sure we're not approving a layout that is really funky that, no one could ever build a typical house on. For a developed property like this one, it's a little bit less of a concern since we already know It's buildable and has been developed. And then as far as uniformity with surrounding properties, there are several properties in the immediate vicinity, which are shown with red markers on the map, that also are not in compliance with the current minimum lot depth. So the proposed configuration is generally consistent with surrounding development. And then the same criteria granting the variance will equal or exceed the purpose of the regulation to be modified. For the variance to the rear yard setback, the purpose of rear yard setbacks is to ensure adequate backyard space as well as separation between structures. So parcel 2 is approximately 1,000 square feet larger than the minimum lot size that we would typically require. So there's plenty of yard space, which is shown in green there. And again, no changes to the existing separation between this property and the neighboring property will occur. The lot orientation is flipping, so what was previously a side yard setback is now a rear yard setback, which is why it's kind of falling out of compliance. But the separation between the two properties and neighboring structures will remain the same. The next variance criterion is that any impacts resulting from the adjustment are mitigated. Again, because there are no physical changes on site and the structures or on site or to the structures and the substandard lot depth and rear yard setback are mitigated by larger than required lots. Staff is not requiring any additional mitigation, and we did not identify any additional impacts. Of course, as the Planning Commission, if you believe that there are impacts that need to be offset, you can require additional mitigation. Next variance criteria is that there are no practical alternatives that have been identified which would accomplish the same purpose and not require a variance. Any alternatives would include physical alterations of the buildings, for example, partial demolition of the buildings, or separating the two units from each other. And these alternatives would have a greater impact and result in a loss of historic resources as opposed to just granting the variance. And then finally, our code requires that the variance conforms to the comprehensive plan and the intent of the ordinance being varied. Some of the comprehensive plan goals and policies that are applicable to the development include efficient use of land, neighborhood livability, historic resources, diverse housing opportunities, and supply of affordable housing. Granting the variance will help advance all of these goals and policies. There are findings in the staff report kind of more specific to each one, but I'll highlight that kind of the bottom line is that with this variance, we are creating an additional home ownership opportunity with almost no impact to the existing neighborhood or the historic district since no physical changes are proposed. So with that, staff finds that the variance criteria is met, and we're recommending approval of the application with the conditions in the staff report, and I can answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Vasilieva. Does anyone have any questions for Diliana? Okay. All right, let's start with Commissioner Staggs.
In the beginning, what did you say about the historic overlay?
So the property is within the McLaughlin Conservation District, and the entire property is a designated historic landmark. Originally, the applicant had come in with an application to the Historic Review Board to reduce the mark of that, or to reduce the size of that landmark boundary and have it only apply to the historic home and not the later addition that is on proposed parcel 2. But since then, the applicant has withdrawn that application, so both units and the entire property, or I guess the proposed 2 properties, will continue to be in the historic district and continue to be designated as historic landmarks.
Is the entire building considered a historic? Or was it just the original part that's historic and the rest of it was added later?
The entire property was identified as a historic landmark. And I think, maybe Christina can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way that historic resource survey was done, we didn't split up properties or units, we just applied it to entire properties.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. It sounds like they withdrew that application, and so the regulation for meeting the historic overlay still stands on both properties. So any exterior alterations or additions onto the newer unit is still reviewed for compliance with the historic overlay district.
Okay, so we're creating a separate legal lot. And the building that is on that lot is not designated historic. And unlike Kanema, where all the houses have to comply, McLaughlin District, they're designated. How can it, I don't understand how it is that if we are separating the lot, how can that still be designated historic when the house that's on it is not?
Because the historic landmark designation applies to the entire property currently.
But it's going to be a separate property.
Yeah, but the historic landmark designation still stands unless the historic review board approves a reduction, which was originally the application the applicant had submitted, but has since withdrawn.
But that's, okay, but that's something they could pursue later?
They could, yeah.
Okay.
So it's just like zoning. It's just like zoning. No matter how many lots you make within an R2 zone, you still have R2 zoning, and it will apply until you change it to something else.
Okay, thank you. That helps. So what can happen later? I realize they're not putting forth any proposal for the house on Jefferson, the smaller house now. But what could be done on that in terms of, could they build something 2 stories or up to the maximum height, keeping that same footprint of that existing building, for example?
Yeah, they potentially could. So anything like that would have to go back through the historic review board, and then obviously would have to meet any applicable building codes, and then our design standards for single-family attached homes.
Okay, but that's something that would go through the historic review board.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just a question, and this is kind of related. The information from one of the city engineers regarding the fire code, because of it being 2 separate lots, is that because they're technically connected by the roof that's over that breezeway?
It is because the type of housing unit is changing. So there are certain building code standards for duplexes, but now that by adding that lot line, they're changing from a duplex to a single family attached unit. And those types of units are subject to different building codes. So our building division would review prior to the lot line being recorded. They would review and, potentially require some upgrades to things like the firewall and separation. It would be reviewed against the standards for single-family attached, which is a different building code standard than for duplexes.
Okay. Doesn't seem logical, but okay. I'm having a struggle between a duplex and an attached home, but that's okay. That's my issue.
Just in addition to that, the building code doesn't allow for buildings to be built on property lines. So if there's a property line that goes through a building, they have these additional codes that pertain to fire protection.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for now.
Commissioner West, did you have something?
No.
Okay, I do have a question. I don't know, it probably doesn't even relate to what we're making decisions on here, but single-family attached, can the person that owns one property just fix their half of the roof and stop? How does that work? Do you have to, do the two owners have to have some kind of agreements over some things? Because how does one property not affect the other property? I know it's a common thing because they build these things all the time, but how does that work? Does when they sell the property to someone else, what do they have to go through?
Yeah, I think there are different ways it can be set up. Like you can have, an HOA or something where some of those common repairs or expenses are shared by everyone in it. But I think it also can be set up where, each person is responsible up to their property line.
Okay. All right.
You might want to ask the applicant during their presentation, you might want to ask them that same question of how they intend to deal with that.
And then if the new owner decided to chop the roof off and he doesn't like the breezeway because he doesn't like the neighbor, would it turn into a code enforcement issue at that point? What happens if somebody just removes the roof and says, I don't want to maintain this?
They would have to, get building permits for that kind of work.
Could they change it to single-family detached by chopping it off?
Yeah, I think they could, but that would trigger just
problems.
There are different setbacks and different lot size requirements. So if they propose to do that, we would review it for compliance with the standards for single-family detached homes.
All right, yeah, it has nothing to do with our decision, but those are just questions that you have to wonder about because the whole thing is very strange. Okay. Anybody have anything else? Okay. All right, so the applicant is Mr. Rick Givens. Okay, Mr. Givens, you have 15 minutes, and please state your name and city of residence. I think you're muted. Oh, now you're muted. Okay, you are still muted.
Can't hear anything.
Okay, you're not muted, but we can't hear you.
If you scroll over the bottom to your microphone, there should be a small arrow key. You can click on that and go to audio settings. That'll pull up the microphone settings. Next to microphone, there should be a drop down. Either select same as system or one of the other selections.
It looked like his volume was on 0.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Have you seen, and if you see that menu, just turn that slider all the way up for the microphone volume.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but you're still kind of quiet. Do you have your microphone turned up?
I'm on my AirPods, but it doesn't seem to be connecting quite properly. Can you hear me if I talk?
No.
You're still pretty quiet. So maybe, can you see what I'm doing on the screen right now?
Yeah, just one moment here. Let me.
And go to this portion of the settings and turn the volume all the way up. You see that?
Yeah, the microphone's all the way out. The
Okay.
speaker- Can you hear me?
No.
Okay, well, that's not gonna work. 1 second here. Let me switch to. How about that?
Can he call us?
Yeah, I can do that. Which one number?
There was something.
Phone number?
Hold on just a second.
All right, I've got the phone number here for you, Mr. Gibbons. I believe you should be able to use 1-253.
Again, please. 03.
215-8782.
We'll advance and entering. Wrong number.
What's the phone number then? I think Jacob's looking for it.
Can you see the phone number there on the screen?
Are you able to, Mr. Gibbons, are you able to see the phone number on the screen there?
So, can you hear me now? Supposed to be. Hello?
So I can hear you.
Okay, great. I don't have any picture or anything now, but that's okay. Oh, there we go. I'm very sorry for that. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, my name is Rick Gibbons. I'm a planning consultant. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Bonnie O'Shara, the applicant. I live in Oregon City. Staff has my mailing address. staff did such a thorough job. I don't think there's anything I could possibly add to what Leanna said, and I appreciate her comments. We would agree with everything she said about variance. The proposal is, as she noted, simply to divide the property along the existing common wall between the two properties. My client wants to be able to sell the units individually, and this is the only real way to accomplish that. She has nothing proposed in the way of a remodeling of either unit. We will be, as noted by staff, we have withdrawn the application for removing the historic landmark designation on the property. We went to the Historic Review Board meeting. They raised some of the concerns that were raised here about the possibility someone could, come in and build a much larger structure that might impact the historic structure on the other parcel, and as a result, they wanted to maintain the overlay. They did discuss the possibility of possibly separating the two units, but we felt, A, that would make additional variances that would be required, and B, it would change the character of what's there, and we didn't want to do that. So we would do the application. As noted, it does provide some protections for the neighborhood, and that any changes to the non-historic part of the structure would still have to go through a review by the HRB to make sure that the changes proposed were still in keeping with the historic character of the property and wouldn't, negatively impact the character of the historic house on parcel 1. In reviewing the conditions of approval, we understand the reasoning behind all of them. I think there is one that seems to me to be out of proportion to what's being asked here, and that's condition number 5. I asked the commission to consider that one. That's asking that the applicant rework the sidewalk detail at the curbs to provide for handicap access. And while that may seem like a rather, reasonable thing and desirable thing to have done, the problem with that is that it, as you know, in the condition, it requires them that we get an engineer involved to design that, which involves them to get a surveyor involved to, map and to topography, and so it gets to be difficult, and the availability of engineers these days and surveyors is very tight. My client is trying to get this done in an expeditious manner, and I think that improvement, frankly, could be left until others are provided in the area. I don't think any of the other ramps in that area are provided, so this one would provide no particular benefit. So we would ask that you consider that as you review the conditions of approval. Other than that, no changes to the conditions of approval are requested, and we would ask that you approve both the partition and the variances as requested. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Oh, I'm much louder now. Okay, does anyone have a question for Mr. Givens? Commissioner LaSalle.
Well, I guess my main question is, what's the purpose of this division? Why not make it one dwelling instead of a duplex?
Well, that's, it's currently 2 units at the present time. So, and it's something that the zone allows. So we wouldn't be proposing to change the existing duplex. And simply we're asking that the ownership be allowed to change. As you know, there are a number of proposals available that are coming up. We'll be considering in middle housing project you're looking at. They're looking to provide additional ownership opportunities, and that's what's being proposed here, is to provide an additional ownership opportunity in an area that currently is already developed, and there won't be any changes made. to let somebody else have the opportunity to own an affordable home. So that's the reasoning.
So if the change is allowed, would both of those properties be put up for sale separately? My interest there is providing additional housing within the city like we're supposed to be doing.
That's my understanding is that yes, you wish to sell both properties separately.
I guess I couldn't understand what he said. Are those two separate, if they're approved, are the two separate parcels going to be sold, or would they remain rentals?
My understanding is that she intends to sell them, and I would assume for ownership purposes, but, you know, any property that's purchased could be rented. I can't guarantee it that somebody else is going to buy it to rent, but the plan is to sell them so that people can buy them and own the homes.
Okay, now, on page 136, in regards to chapter 16.08.065 lot size reduction, your applicant's response states it's not applicable in its entirety. No lot size reduction is proposed. However, in the partition and variance application, background item 2, project description states, I quote, a 2-lot partition is proposed to separate the lots so that each residence is on a separate lot. So wouldn't that be dividing it? Also on page 146, the applicant's response is the proposal is that the property is divided into 2 parcels so that each residence will be on an individual lot. So it sounds like conflicting statements.
No, they're not conflicting. Yes, the property is being divided, but the minimum parcel size for single-family attached lots in Oregon City is 2,500 square feet. Each of the proposed lots exceeds that minimum requirement. So there's no reduction to the standard requested.
Well, my main question was it stated no lot size reduction is proposed. So
It says that's in relationship to the lot size standard, not to the existing parcel size of the entire property. No reduction to the lot size standard is proposed.
okay, and my final statement is if this is approved, I would like to suggest a condition of approval that the buildings be separated and eliminate the common wall by relocating the breezeway so that it would be between the 2 buildings. And then the roof lines of each building be appropriately redone so it would look like 2 separate buildings. That's all I have. Thank you.
What would be the purpose of that?
I'd like to comment on that if I may. That would create additional zoning problems if they're not attached, if there's not a single family attached, then the rear yard of parcel 1 becomes 0. Right now it's a attached unit, so that doesn't apply. Additionally, the total distance between the 2 units is only about 4 feet, so there isn't the possibility of putting a lot line there and meeting the minimum building code requirement of 3 feet of separation between each other. You need 6 feet. There isn't that space available. And additionally, the Historic Review Board was very much concerned about how that would look, and it would require their approval to do that. And finally, there's no requirement that, we do that in order to make this request. We are not making that proposal to remove the breezeway. I mean, it would be in some ways beneficial to the client to be able to do that, but it triggers a whole bunch of other problems that you need to
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I might try.
As far as Commissioner LaSalle's concerns, we've gone down this road, several times. Sometimes the way we see things, I understand what he's saying. That's why I brought up the concerns earlier about, single family detached. What if someone wants to just separate them? But yeah, with zero, you can't have a zero setback on the back of a building on single family detached. So the applicant is kind of stuck with what the property is capable of becoming, and that's the application he's submitted, and that's what we need to make decisions on. So if we don't have any more questions for the applicant. Okay, all right, thank you very much. And do we have any representatives of a neighborhood association that would like to speak? Government agency? Okay. Anybody watching want to make a comment? Okay. So we have no comments, so there's no rebuttal from the applicant. I guess we can close the public record? Okay, public record is closed and we deliberate. Any more concerns? Someone would like to make a motion?
I'd like to mention just a couple things and then make a
Absolutely.
motion.
Sure.
There's some great examples out there of, like one example of in the cottage home world in various developments in Washington, up near Seattle, where the cottage home builder and the local zoning code allows a zero setback with cottages right on the property line. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a bad thing for a home to be right on the property line. It just depends on the context of what's around it. So in that case, you have these cottage homes that on one side, they have a zero setback. So they're on one side of the home, it's right on the property line. And then there's a gap or a space. So I don't think zero lot lines are necessarily a bad thing. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was, we are, as a city, we are trying to create more housing and more opportunities for people to buy homes. And this application is a perfect example of that happening real time right now with us. So
Right.
Before I make my motion, though, I just want to make sure everyone else has an opportunity to ask questions or say things.
One more. Commissioner Mitchell.
I just have a question that before we vote and close the hearing. On the conditions of approval, I noticed the wording, there are 3 separate sections of conditions of approval, and they all start with the applicant shall include the following information. And that's different than the wording I've seen before, because a lot of what's listed in those items is not just information. It's separating the water line. It's providing the ADA ramp. So it usually doesn't that wording require these things need to be done before issuance of a building permit or whatever? You understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, we do have the final sentence of each of those sections that says the information shall be approved prior to issuance unless otherwise indicated. I'm happy to, change the language if we need to clarify. I think this is the normal template we use, so I'm not sure.
I went back and looked at a couple, and typically it says, words to the effect of, these items have to be done at this time, and these items have to be done at this time. Not just, we don't want them to provide information about separating the water lines, we want them to separate the water lines. Just something that needs to be looked at. I think that's just kind of technical matter in how the final conditions are written. And the only other thing I'll say is my concern related to the historic status of the Jefferson Street property and are allayed, and the fact that anything that happens there would have to go through the HRB process. The concerns I had coming in are handled.
Okay, I do have one more thing I wanted to bring up. Mr. Givens mentioned the ADA ramp. Is that a city requirement that any new single-family attached has to have an ADA ramp? Because I believe he was trying to see if we could waive that condition of approval or postpone it. It was hard to hear what he was asking us to do there.
Yeah, so the minor partition, any minor partition application triggers compliance with public improvement requirements. So sometimes that's putting in a sidewalk, widening a sidewalk, dedication. So in this case, their frontage is largely in compliance with the current standard, with the exception of this ADA ramp. So, you know, of course, when we're requiring public improvements, we want to be mindful of the proportionality of what we're requiring compared to what is being proposed. So in this case, our Public Works Department is not requiring any upgrades to the sidewalk or anything like that. And they're just requiring this ADA ramp at the corner of 10th and Jefferson that is currently out of compliance. Because the property is already developed, this is probably our only opportunity to get any of those improvements. You know, unless another single-family home was built or something, which may be unlikely given the fact that they're protected by the historic district.
Okay, what if the Historic Review Board took offense to the ramp because it wasn't historically there? Could they oppose the ramp? No? Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. So,
Can I just offer a clarification?
Sure.
The ramp is only, it's not an accessible ramp on the property to the house or anything. It's just down on the sidewalk, from the sidewalk down to the asphalt. So it's like a little 5-6 foot condition where we're just making the sidewalk, you know, you put that cut in the curb. So people with disabilities can get down to the asphalt instead of there being a curb there.
okay.
It's not a ramp for the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you understand Mr. Gibbons'
I could not hear a word of what he was saying, so no.
Well, I have a question about that too.
I believe that his request was to remove that condition from the conditions of approval.
Yeah.
But the reason he's identified for why is he thinks it's not roughly proportional to the impacts of this development.
Okay.
He thinks that there's no new unit created here that creates the impacts. And I think my response to that is that the ADA is different when it comes to public improvements for residential development. We want to encourage ADA compliance with respect to the sidewalks that abut these houses. These are historic houses that at the time they were built didn't have ADA sidewalks. So I believe that this condition doesn't carry with it the same constitutional obligations that you would have with respect to an oversized water line, a road that is larger than the impacts from development. And here we have a request to provide new ownership resulting from a partition, and that provision of new ownership requires that we accommodate accessibility and make that available to prospective purchasers of this new property. So that's how I would view it. So.
Okay, if it's a requirement, it's a requirement.
Okay. If you'd like me to try to.
But is this ADA ramp, is this on the sidewalk? then
Is there a drawing of it?
then
I wish I could
if,
picture it better.
if that's the case, I understand that if Public Works is involved with an ADA ramp improvement, they can't just do one corner, they have to do all four corners. If Public Works is involved in it. Now, would this same rule apply to a private party?
So the applicant has to do the property that is abutting their frontage. That is the limit of what we can condition them to accomplish. So this is the extent of the ADA accommodation. I don't know if there are ramps on the other corners. If there are, then it complies. If there aren't, then the city will examine that when there is development abutting those other corners. But what we have heard is that folks can't hear Mr. Gibbons, so I think we need to the extent the record is closed, we need to give him an opportunity to have 5 minutes or something to weigh in so that we can hear him.
So
Right.
I might
So
be,
let's reopen the record.
hold on just a second. I might be able to call him using our VoIP system and maybe improve the sound rather than going through Zoom. Would you like me to try that?
Let's try that.
So I'll ask you to hang up your phone and I'll give you a call. Go ahead.
Hello,
Please.
this is Rick.
Is that better?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I say we get rid of Zoom in the whole process. That's dumb. Anyway, I think at this point, I'm not going to press the matter any further. My only concern is simply that I know the difficulty of getting engineers and surveyors right now. Projects are extremely tight. I work through this field every day, and every day people ask me, when can I help them find an engineer? And the answer is no. None of them will take additional work because they're just booked. I don't know. Maybe this is something I have to talk over with Josh Wheeler. We need to find a way that maybe just a standard detail can be used. I don't know, but I suspect it's going to be a problem for her to find someone to prepare the plans for Public Works to review for something as simple as a drop apron for a sidewalk ramp. And I don't want to see her project held up. That's my concern, but I don't think you guys can solve it. I think I can talk to Josh.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody satisfied with that? Okay, then I will reclose the public record. And now do we have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve GLUA 21000069, MP 21000006, and VAR 21000007.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Staggs. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
And a second by Commissioner.
Clarification, approval with conditions.
Oh, yeah.
And the report. Commissioner Staggs.
Right.
Yeah, okay. It just wasn't
putting
specifically stated that was the requested.
Right, approval with conditions as stated in the staff report. Okay, right. Okay, Jacob, can you call roll?
Commissioner LaSalle.
Yes.
Commissioner Staggs.
Aye.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll.
Aye.
And Chair Schlagenhofer.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, motion passes. And can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes.
All right. Excellent, we're on break. Thank you.
Yes, please.
we're back.
Okay, we're back from break. And we are on agenda item number 3. It is a work session, GLUA. Why is it GLUA? It's not a general land use application, is it?
Well, it's the parent
Okay.
that we put all applications in.
I'll read what it says. GLUA 22-0002, LEG 22-00001, Housing Choices Code Update Work Session. Now, question. Legislative, do we have the legislative script?
But we don't need, this is not a hearing, we're just at a work session tonight.
Great,
So
okay.
we will
That
do
saves
the
a lot of reading.
legislative script on March 28th.
Okay, and who is going to be introducing this?
Myself, or unless do you want to? Christina Robertson Gardner. I have
All right.
a presentation this evening as well as our consultant. And I'd like to start, let's see. So tonight we have a work session on Housing Choices Code Update, which is Legislative File 2201. This is a general staff overview. We also have Elizabeth Decker from Jet Planning here to help provide some background. As I mentioned, this is a work session, so we don't have any public comment this evening. Our first public hearing is at the next Planning Commission meeting, which is March 28th. So this evening, Planning Commission is to listen to staff's presentation, ask questions, and if you have any, you are not required to provide any direction tonight, but as time is a little limited for this first package, if you have any direction, I welcome it as staff, but if you don't worry. You are also encouraged to send me any questions via email in the next 2 weeks, or set up a time to call me and talk on the phone. This is a legislative process, and so there is no ex parte contact. You actually are encouraged to have these conversations with yourself and other community members. And I do encourage you to kind of think through some of these questions, and I'm happy to have those conversations at any time in this process. So to start off, I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Decker from Jet Planning. She's been our consultant on this process, and she provided the memo that is on your packet, and she did the really extensive code audit, looking through the House Bill 2001, and has been helping lots of other cities and jurisdictions. So she has a lot of good background on how House Bill 2001, what the requirements are, and then how different cities are addressing that. So I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth. She has about 8 slides, and then I'll finish out the presentation. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Great, thank you, Christina. I know the sound is a bit challenging tonight, so I'll do my best on my end. Is this coming through?
Sounds good to me, but you wanted it a little bit louder?
It works for me, but I just wanted to make sure you can hear. So thank you, Chair and members of the Planning Commission, for having me here tonight to help talk about the Housing Choices Code updates to meet HB 2001. I'm delighted to be back working in Oregon City. The other piece of my background that Christina also could mention is that I worked with the City of Oregon City and Pete Walter and Laura Turway on the equitable housing policy project that really sets the stage, sets the city up really well to do HB 2001 implementation. And we'll talk a little about this tonight, but glad to be working with you again and to talk specifically about HB 2001 and the code updates that we are looking at. So the new legislation in the form of HB 2001 is colloquially known as the Middle Housing Law. It was passed by the state legislature in 2019, and it is one piece of many pieces of the puzzle of addressing Oregon's housing shortage, the lack of available units, the lack of variety of units, and is meant to help create more variety in more communities. And as a follow-up piece to that, SB 458 was passed in 2021. And SB 458 follows on to HB 2001 by creating a special category of land divisions just for middle housing that helps to make those middle housing types permitted in HB 2001 more viable for home ownership opportunities. And so together, HB 2001 and SB 458 apply to both medium cities that are any city in the state over 10,000, as well as to large cities over 25,000. So that includes Oregon City, and Oregon City is also implicated because all metro area cities over 1,000 are required to comply. So more than one reason why we are doing these code updates for the city that need to be done by June 30th of this year. Next, please. So the main content of HB 2001 is that in all, it really primarily affects neighborhoods where single-family detached homes are permitted. It continues to permit single-family detached dwellings. Nothing changes about those existing regulations. And on top of those permissions, large cities like Oregon City must allow duplexes on every lot where a single-family detached dwelling is permitted, and in all residential zones where single-family detached dwellings are permitted, but not necessarily on every lot, cities must allow triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. So it brings in a greater variety of housing types for those large cities. Next.
Sorry, there you go.
So a few visuals just to get a sense of some of these newer types of middle housing. These are really historic types. Communities have been built with duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, before World War II generally. There are examples in Oregon City already. But what we'd be expecting to come as a result of this bill is newer construction. And so we're also seeing some newer construction around the state that gives us a sense of what these might look like. Not exactly in your community, could be a little different. Go ahead. And one thing to keep in mind for middle housing is there's at least 4 different scenarios that we're considering. So it's not, we're writing one set of regulations, but they'll apply in different contexts. So the first distinction to think about is that middle housing can be both new structures built entirely from the ground up. So for example, a duplex in this bottom left photo, or the townhouses in this bottom right photo. They could be entirely new, but they could also be a conversion of an existing structure. So a single family home that either is internally divided or has additional units added onto it. Those conversions are probably going to be rarer because of building codes, but could happen. And then the context for which these could happen is both infill within existing neighborhoods, so just a single development, such as the duplex on the left here, could happen on a lot in a single family neighborhood, traditionally single family, now allowing middle housing. But it can also happen within entirely new neighborhoods. As new neighborhoods are planned and the land is divided, those individual lots can be built intentionally for middle housing. So the example on the right here are these townhouses that were built into a new subdivision. So same standards, but different contexts for how they could apply. Next, please. When we think about how House Bill 2001 applies to Oregon City, because it is a large city and a metro city, we are looking at the full range of middle housing types, the duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. And we are focusing on the low density and medium density zones in Oregon City. The high density R2 zone is not directly affected by HB 2001. And so many middle housing types are already permitted in the R2 zone. That was part of the 2019 equitable housing policy work. And those middle housing types will continue to be permitted in R2, but they are not required to meet the specifics of HB 2001. We will talk about some of the possible code updates and flag some issues for your future consideration to bring this R2 high density zone more into alignment with some of the changes that are mandated for the low density and medium density zones, but they are not direct. We don't have to make any changes to the R2 zone in order to comply with HB 2001 by June. So that's not our focus tonight. Instead, these updates are really intended to build on the 2019 Equitable Housing Policy Code updates. The medium density zones in particular are in really good shape. A lot of the changes that we made in 2019 just need very small refinements. There's a little bit more work to do in low density we'll talk about, but just to say, overall policy is very consistent. And these updates also help the city implement the comprehensive plan goals around housing and a variety of housing types, as well as the recently adopted 2021 housing needs analysis to create more housing options that are less expensive and typically smaller than comparable new single-family detached dwellings. Thank you, Christina. Looking at our overall marching orders, when we were putting together the draft code updates, our implementation direction was first of all to comply with those state regulations in HB 2001 and SB 458, and keep it really focused on on what those state requirements are by the June 30th deadline. And the second key direction was to maintain the policy direction from the 2019 Housing Policy Updates Project. Given the extensive public engagement, community conversations that we had then, we wanted to stay true to those policy decisions that were made then, which those two directions together really helped us narrow the focus for the code updates in this first round that's the purpose of this work session, and that will come before you for a public hearing in 2 weeks. Next, please. So to give you an overview of the changes, it is, there's more detail in the memo. The detailed code audit matrix is about, just a short 28 pages of going into these changes in more detail. But to give you the high-level summary, we're looking at a couple different areas throughout the code. The first is to update the definitions to make sure that the terms are used consistently and defined consistently with the state law. Minor refinements there. The uses, the big change there is to ensure that all duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes get added in as permitted uses in those low density zones. There are no changes needed to middle housing uses in the medium and high density zones. For dimensional standards, there's some work to update the minimum lot sizes for these middle housing types because there's specific direction in the state standards that dictate how large, what size the lots can be for middle housing relative to the lot sizes for single-family detached. So we needed to make some changes there. But the minimum setbacks and building lot coverage, there's no immediately necessary changes to those. There's some considerations for the future about how you might address building lot coverage going forward. But that can be done as part of this package if you feel strongly. It can also be deferred to a second package of code updates. Next piece on the density standards, there are some changes needed here to exempt middle housing from maximum density in the low and medium density zones. And that essentially is just to say that the new lot sizes will control the density, and there will not also be a density that will push the development potential below what could otherwise be permitted on those lot sizes. So it's really a matter of aligning those two pieces. We also are looking to introduce a new minimum density for townhouses. That's in the 17 to 25 units per acre. We'll talk about a little bit later on, but that's the one where there is a new standard proposed. And there are no changes to minimum density. That will continue to apply to middle housing the same as it applies to single family detached. Another big area of code is the design standards. And a lot of work was done on these with the previous code updates. And so we're looking to update the clear and objective standards that are specific to each middle housing type. And so we'll just make sure that that language is up to date. Next, please.
Oh, that's might, yeah.
Well, there was another one.
There was another slide that was missing, so I'm going to let Elizabeth do some good contemporaneous speaking on that one.
Yeah, there we go. So the other ones, this is a fun game, memory tricks. Parking, of course. The overall direction from HB 2001 is to require off-street parking of 1 space per unit for all of these middle housing types. And the equitable housing code updates made progress in that direction. We had a few refinements to bring those parking limits in line. There are also some changes proposed to the access and driveway standards that we are working on and coordinating with development services to make sure that they work from a public works standpoint to minimize conflicts for vehicular access. And then there are some changes proposed within the land division chapter to create a new middle housing land division process, which is specific to a single lot. This implements SB 458 for middle housing on a single existing lot. Where you can do a middle housing project. So it is distinct from a subdivision that's needed to create all of the lots to begin with. But if you either have a single lot in a subdivision or an infill lot where you want to do, one townhouse project or one quadplex, SB 458 directs these middle housing land divisions that apply just on that one lot to support that project. So we're creating new standards for that. And let's see, there's at least one other. Hang on, I think I have it. Oh, and then the last piece that we wanted to talk to you about tonight in the overview was the goal protected areas. So as you may know, as planning commissioners, Oregon has a range of land use planning goals that are statewide and implemented through Oregon City's comprehensive plan. Housing is certainly one of those goals, but there are multiple goals we're trying to address. And so those are implemented, for example, the historic overlay zone, the historic overlay district implements goal 5, dealing with historic resources, and the interplay between goal 10 housing and goal 5 historic means that middle housing types will be permitted within the historic overlay, but they will be subject to the discretionary historic design review standards and processes that apply for all development in that area. And the Housing Review Board is continuing to refine how those standards will apply to middle housing. So that piece will be addressed through the existing historic process. Within the flood hazard, there's no single family zoning that currently is in flood hazard areas, so we don't need to make any changes to that section of code. However, the geologic hazard overlay, that area of code was specifically, that's a goal 7 resource under the statewide planning goals, and the geologic hazards specifically are exempted from middle housing requirements because of the potential for increased risk to persons and property by adding additional units in geologic hazard areas. And so there is no requirement to permit middle housing within that overlay. The other overlays to draw your attention to are the Willamette Greenway and the Natural Resources Overlay that have additional protections on development. And all of those protections for those 2 overlays will continue to apply to any middle housing developed there, same as applies to single family. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Christina.
All right, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'd like to go over the policies in a little more overview of kind of the process by which to do the code amendments, and then we'll open it back up to questions of both myself and Elizabeth, and I can go back to any of these slides if you have and when you have questions after the presentation. So what is included in the legislative packet, as Elizabeth mentioned, we're really kind of looking at question 1, what needs to be adopted by June 30th to comply with House Bill 2001? So I kind of have this, the must address item. And once again, if the city does not adopt HB 2001 compliant code that's effective by June 30th. There is a model code that was created by the Department of Land Conservation and Development through an OAR process. Therefore, the city is required, the model code will be in effect. So until such time, after June 30th, if we do not have adopted code sections, there is a statewide model code which will be legally effective. So it is in Oregon City's best interest to ensure that we have the first package adopted by June 30th for Oregon City's approach to meeting HB 2001. The next section is should address. So these are code sections that now be misaligned based on required code revisions. Some are simple changes, others may have policy questions, which we'll talk about in the future slide. If there's clear direction by the Planning Commission, we'll include either no change or change as part of the should address in this June package. And then there's the kind of larger policy questions that do not need to be answered by June 30th and could very well be part of a second review package this fall. I just want to also remind everybody that if you have a private covenant restrictions or CC&R or HOA on an existing subdivision that limits your lot to a single family residential, HB 2001 may not be effective on your lot because you might have additional private restrictions. New subdivisions that are approved after this code housing update are not allowed to put restrictions on middle housing. But if you have existing restrictions on your private property, this may not be effective on your private property. So I always encourage people, if you have questions, to look at your deed to see if you have additional restrictions. The city does not enforce private restrictions. These will be citywide changes, but your own individual lot may have additional restrictions that are a private covenant. Next slide. So what goes into this code package? We have the inputs and outputs. So some of the inputs we have are the specific House bill wording, the specific Senate bill wording. We have Division 46, which is the Oregon Administrative Rules, which is attached in your packet as there's a PDF of other resources, and there's hyperlinks to this information if you want to dive into the specific rules that were created through this process. There's the model code, which some situations we may utilize, especially they have really nice diagrams. I have to say, I really appreciate some of the model code diagrams, and we very well may be incorporating some of them into our code package, as well as the code audit that Elizabeth provided that really cross-referenced all the requirements into our existing code. Supplement to that, we have the policy questions that the planning commissioners will be wrestling over in these next couple of meetings. Internal staff comments, such as our Public Works Department and Development Services. We had 2 surveys that went out to the public, one through the utility bill in October, and a second follow-up survey in January, and the results are attached to your packet. And then we had some focus group interviews that we also brought in. So into that are the inputs, and the outputs really are the red lines that you'll be reviewing this spring, as well as any direction you give staff and the City Commission for a second package this fall. So the policy questions we provided in the memo, and I'm going to lay out each policy question in a slide tonight, are, there's kind of a couple compliance options. Each question has a compliance option, which is either make the change that's required by HB 2001, or the current code is already compliant. And then there may be other alternative options that you could pursue. And then you can choose to either direct staff to include that in this package in June, or ask staff to continue that policy question to the fall. So kind of think about it as stay the course or do what's required, come up with an alternative approach, do it now or do it in the fall. So what I'm going to be providing for you in an email this week is a policy tracking form that kind of puts all the policy questions, lays out the alternative options, the compliance options, and kind of, do you want to pursue this for the June 30th package or later this fall? It's a nice tracking form. You don't have to use it, but I'll provide a PDF and a Word document if between now and the March 28th hearing, you want to do your own homework to see where you fall into that. That might be really helpful. So when we get to the March 28th meeting, there might be a lot of alignment between the Planning Commission on half of the questions. Then we can kind of figure out what are the questions where there may not be alignment, or when there may be additional information you need, and we can focus our energy. So you'll be seeing that in your inbox this week. Let's see. So here are hold on. Here's an overview of the policy questions that are available in the policy document attached to your agenda. The first one is the middle housing and the geohazard area, as Elizabeth identified. HB 2001 allows cities to balance Goal 10 housing and Goal 7 natural hazards. And if they choose, they could not require middle housing be implemented in our geologic hazard overlay. So, for example, the compliance option is maintain the existing density standard of 2 units per acre for development within the applicable geohazard areas, so that effectively precludes middle housing. So we wouldn't have it in the underlying zone. It would be if you have a property that is in the geologic hazard overlay and you want to build a duplex, we open up geologic hazard codes, we see that you are in unstable slope area or a steep slope, any of the areas that are triggered for the 2 units per acre, and you are not allowed to build. So that happens today. So the compliance option 1 is continue with the code as written. An alternative option, you could say, the geologic hazard code puts really strict requirements on the footprint of development and how much disturbance area. So an alternative approach would be, we would not reduce the number of dwelling units in the geologic hazard area. We would say you can put as many units in the cube that the development requires. So if you have a reduced construction area for a single family residential, but you can put a duplex in that same reduced construction area, that's allowed. So really the first option is to reduce the amount of dwelling units in the geohazard. The other option is to say it's the same amount of disturbance area, 2 small units may be the same amount of people as 1 large single family home. So in some areas, you might not necessarily get less people if you reduce it to 2 units per acre. It's going from a single family to potentially allowing 2 units in that same development cube. So those are 2 options. The next policy question is townhome maximum density. And this is one where HB 2001 actually provides a range of options for cities to choose, but the city has to choose one of them. And right now, the compliance option would be to choose the lowest density approach of maximum density. So if you're allowed anywhere between a maximum, the city could choose anywhere between 17 units per acre and 28 units per acre in options. The compliance option would be choose the smallest amount for the maximum density. Therefore, you're saying you want to have the least amount of impact, the least amount of opportunity to have townhomes in the single family district. An alternative approach would maybe to choose a higher number that is an option in HB 2001. You could permit up to 29 units per net developable acre. So there's some policy questions of how much incentive do you want to provide for townhomes in the single family or the existing low density residential zone, whatever the minimum requirement is, or to potentially pursue more.
Quick question, what, in the compliance option, what's the density per acre?
Let's see, I believe it's the 17 units per acre.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. The next option, which is actually kind of tied a little bit to the question we had at the previous land use application, is does the city want to pursue looking at the ability to have detached middle housing? So right now we require duplexes to be attached. And we discussed the definition of being sharing a common wall. The city could pursue to allow middle housing, duplex, quadplex, triplex, to be detached. One option would be so the compliance option, I'm having trouble reading, sorry. The compliance option would be to continue to require our existing code, which requires all the units to be attached with a common wall. An alternative option would be to permit these units to be built as detached units within a single project. An initial step would be consider permitting detached duplexes either this spring or in the fall package.
Can I just have one quick question?
Sure.
What's the distinction between the June package and the fall package?
The June package would be the code requirements that are required to meet HB 2001. So an example for this, we are already in compliance.
All right.
We have a code section, HB 2001 does not require the city to look at detached duplexes. It's an option the city could look at to provide additional flexibility. They could either propose that in this June package, look at it in more specificity this fall, or not pursue it at all. The next policy question is duplex lot coverage in medium density zones. And this is that question that came up in the should address section, is we now have portions of our code that we worked really hard in with the Equitable Housing Project that now are a little bit misaligned with House Bill 2001. So for example, the duplex lot coverage in the medium density zone, we could stay with the 50 to 55% lot coverage for single family detached dwellings. But right now we also allow 60 to 65% lot coverage if you're doing an accessory dwelling unit. So if I'm a single family house and accessory dwelling unit in the medium density zone, I'm allowed a little bit higher lot coverage. But if I did a duplex, I would have to, right now with our current zone, in our current code, you would be at 50 or 55%. So do you want to add duplexes to be aligned with single family and ADU, or do you want to keep with what the code is? That's a policy question to provide to staff.
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. What's the difference between a detached duplex and a house with an ADU?
That is a very good question, and that's sometimes a little bit of a...
I don't like it when our attorney is shaking her head.
There is no difference. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The HB 2001 did not provide direction on accessory dwelling units. It provided direction on middle housing. Especially as we move forward with middle housing land division or looking at detached, the differentiation between ADU and duplex is going to get a lot closer. There may be situations where they may have currently they may have different system development fees. There may be situations where they are slightly different, but over the years, they're going to be very closer to each other than not, especially if we allow detached duplexes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to add one more thing to that. Can they be sold separately?
With middle housing land division, yes.
Okay, without it, they wouldn't be able to.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Let's see. Oh, so we have that same question of lot coverage in low density zones. So we have this mismatch of lot coverage in medium density zones and lot coverage in low density zones. So we have, right now we have the compliance option is set a maximum building lot coverage for middle housing types in low density zone equal to the allowed lot coverage for single family detached dwellings. So whatever your lot coverage is for single family will be the same for detached. We could increase it to allow higher lot coverage for more intense middle housing. It's not something that's required, but it's something to think about as we move forward, either this June or this fall or not at all. The last policy question is cottage cluster on-street parking credits. So the compliance option is maintain the minimum requirement of 1 off-street parking space per cottage with no reductions in available on-street parking spaces. So what we have today meets House Bill 2001. The alternative option is to make cottage cluster developments eligible to use abutting on-street parking credits like we do for commercial development. Once again, this is a question, you could choose to address this in June, in the fall, or not at all. The last one is garage options for cottage clusters. Right now, you could maintain the existing option, which basically says if you want to have an attached garage in your cottage cluster, it needs to be considered part of your building footprint and your building square footage. So, you know, you're giving up a lot of space if a garage is important to you, but we do allow detached garages that could be shared between units. An alternative approach would be explicitly to permit up to from 2 to up to 400 square foot detached garage for individual cottages, and they would be exempt from the square footage calculations of cluster homes. Or we could clarify that the 600 square foot structures must be in a shared parking area, and or we could provide additional exemptions. So how much do you want to either limit or encourage attached garages and cluster homes? Once again, don't have to make any changes to be compliant with HB 2001, but it is definitely something we're hearing about where and how parking is designed in cluster homes.
I'm sorry, I have a question. I remember, it was a long time ago, but code changed and you could only have a certain amount of the front of your house could be the garage door. I don't know if it was 60%.
Correct, that's for single family.
Does this affect that?
Yeah, that's for single family residential, and we would apply that as well to this. Anything that's applied for single family residential, we would apply to middle housing.
Okay, so you couldn't have a garage door with a house on top?
Unless you were a townhome.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so there are some additional policy questions that kind of popped up and other communities are looking at it or just really pop up as part of our code audit. I have some here. Additional ones may come up as we have these public hearings and discussions. So at some point, please provide staff direction in the hearings process if the Planning Commission wants to pursue any of these policies in another package. If you have additional policy items, please provide them. Please provide that direction to staff. And if one or more of these the Planning Commission wants to pursue in the fall, the Planning Commission can start to have work sessions on it as early as this summer if you want to. But we really aren't prepared as staff to really implement any of these as part of this spring package because of the time constraints. One that I wanted to bring up that was brought up by a public comment you'll hear next week, which I thought was a really interesting question, and that's the last policy, is allow conversions of non-conforming single-family residential units to duplexes. So in our mixed-use downtown zone and our mixed-use corridor zone, a single family is not allowed, but they're non-conforming, they're pre-existing. So there are single family homes in our mixed-use downtown zone and our mixed-use corridor zone, and they exist, and they can exist as single families as long as they want. Right now in those two zones, we allow threeplexes, but we don't allow new duplexes. So now that we're starting to see single family and duplexes throughout HB 2001 almost becoming close to the same use, the question is should the city allow the conversion of non-conforming single families to duplexes as part of this process? Because right now, if you were a single family, you could only stay a single family or go to a triplex. In some situations, that might not be an option for you. So is there an opportunity to provide additional units within an existing built framework? So the next steps, sorry.
I'm sorry, Christina?
Yep.
We are 7 minutes to 10.
Yep. I just want to say next steps. Yep.
Okay.
This is the last slide. Next steps. Be ready to give staff direction on March 28th. You really have two hearings, so it is ask lots of questions, send me lots of emails, give me a call, provide staff as clear a direction as you can on March 28th, fill out your policy form. April 11th will be the formal recommendation to the Planning Commission, and as well telling staff kind of what items you want to look for in the fall, or start even having work sessions this summer. City Commission will be reviewing the June package in April and May. We have to have an effective date of June 30th, and not just an adopted date, an effective date of June 30th. And that is where we're at. So I know we have 7 minutes, but I'm available for any questions, and Elizabeth is here as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody have any more questions for Christina or Elizabeth?
Can I ask one?
Sure, we got.
Christina, I'm sorry, I didn't catch, why would you have a non-conforming single-family home?
Well, if you are a single-family home in the mixed-use downtown, for instance, or mixed-use corridor, it's not a permitted use.
Oh, okay, because it's not a permitted use.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry, I missed that. Well, I certainly will go through this and write all my questions. It's late.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I had a quick question.
Okay.
So if I have a 10,000 square foot lot in the R10 zone, and I put a quadplex on it, fourplex on it, and I make them detached, because maybe we allow that, let's say we do,
Sure.
and then the SB 458 takes it into effect, and then we have effectively 4 R2.5 lots, what's the difference between that and a subdivision? I mean, not a subdivision, but a,
Yeah,
partition
that's a good
otherwise.
question. This legislature really saw the need for deed simple ownership, because that's how you can get conventional mortgages. And so they provided really clear direction and said, we really see a need for deed simple, not complicated, not, a condomization, complicated process, but to have your unit with the land underneath it to be sold, maybe with some maintenance agreements and other things if you're a part of that. So, really in the sense you could have a fourplex that's all attached, that has the land underneath it that could be sold through middle housing, where each unit 1, 2, 3, 4 has land underneath it and can be sold with some common maintenance agreements, or if it's detached, the same thing. That being said, there's a parent parcel, and you will forever be tied to your parent parcel. So your parent parcel is the middle housing project, which looks at lot coverage and setbacks and all those things. And so if I'm a child parcel of one of the units of the fourplex, I can only approve additions if they meet the lot coverage of the parent parcel. So you can't have keep adding on.
So in my example, the setbacks for the R10 zone would apply rather than the setbacks for the R2.5.
Correct. The lots may be small, and really the key thing to think about middle housing, you're building a compliant middle housing development, middle housing building or buildings if you allow detached. So you come in, get your building permits, we check the parent parcel. The middle housing land division is really drawing lines on a map so you own the property underneath it. But there's not a minimum lot size underneath it. We are looking at the development approval of the larger lot. Do you meet the setbacks, lot coverage, all the middle housing requirements for the parent lot? And then you can sell the land underneath your unit for deed simple.
Thank you.
Okay, so if they're attached units, or detached for that matter, the internal setbacks go away, right?
The only setbacks we will look at in middle housing land division are for the parent parcel.
Okay. Okay.
Okay,
I got a question, Dirk.
okay, we got 2 minutes, or we have to vote.
How does this apply to, how does the deed simple world apply to cottage clusters?
Same thing. So if you have a cottage cluster, which is up to 12 units in our current code, build your cottage cluster, meet the cottage cluster development standards, you can come back and separate those units out. So you'll have maintenance agreements and private agreements because there'll be joint open spaces, because cluster housing has built that in. So, but you will be able to do the same thing. You'll be able to have a deed simple ownership. And we allow that today, but middle housing land division provides clear direction than what we have currently in our code.
I have a lot of questions, and tonight's probably not the night, as late as it is, but I want to throw in a commercial here. I think it's really important that this is just the first round, and we need to very shortly move on to those could be kind of things, including housing in our mixed-use zones as well. By weird coincidence, I heard from two different people over the last couple of weeks relating to obstacles to building housing in our mixed-use zones. It bothers me how piecemeal we work on our code. So I really hope, I mean, I understand, and I don't think I want to put us in a position of implementing the model code just because of the time constraint. But so there's things we're going to need to move to a little bit later, but we can't kick it down the road and keep doing this just piecemeal. We really need to look at housing across all of our zones. So that's my commercial.
Okay, thank you. And it is 10 o'clock, so we need to vote if we're going to continue the meeting. I can't imagine it's going to be more than a few minutes, so can we call for a vote?
Is there anything left?
There might be communications, or maybe we have some more questions, but it is after 10, so we need to vote. I think legally that's a
What can we hear from
requirement.
staff before that?
I think we need to vote right now because it's past 10.
I'll make a motion to go to 10:15, excuse me.
Okay. Motion to go to 10:15.
Second.
Okay, motion, Commissioner Mitchell, and a second by Commissioner Stoll.
Aye.
Commissioner Staggs.
Aye.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll.
Aye.
Chair Schlagenhofer.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Okay. Any more questions? Questions for staff? Anything staff wants to tell us?
Well, for HB 2001, once again, recommend email me with questions, set up a time, we can talk over the phone. I'm happy to walk through. This is a legislative process. There's no ex parte contact, so you can have a direct dialogue with, myself as many times as you need between now and the hearing.
Okay, and then I guess my question is, it's easy enough to go with the minimums now, and then perhaps come up with more policy later because we're running out of time. If we do a lot of fine policy now, it's harder to go the other way.
Yeah, I mean, if there's not consensus, my recommendation is stay with the compliance option and then revisit it in the fall. If there's, if you don't have consensus with the Planning Commission, but it's still something you want to think about, that could be a direction you give back to staff, which is keep it as is, but we want to revisit it.
Okay, yeah, we can always do further code revisions later. Okay, all right, anything else?
One thing.
Sure, we got 15 minutes now.
Ms. Robertson and Gardner and I had a discussion about this the other day, and I hope you'll bring this back so the whole commission can hear it, because it's still a serious concern of mine. Theoretically, a developer comes in with 100-unit single-family home subdivision, and we approve it. They then come back and use the expedited land use process, and now our 100-unit subdivision is 400 quadplexes.
Yep, that's a great question.
Traffic impacts, sewer and water impacts. How do we prevent, not that it would happen, but how can we protect ourselves against that?
Sure, the worst case scenario.
And I don't want you to try to answer it tonight, because
I didn't have a slide on it, but I will be ready to answer, and we do have some protection through the subdivision process.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Okay, anything else? Do we have any communications?
I just have one, and that is at our last Planning Commission meeting, I asked you to hold April 12th for a joint meeting with the City Commission, and they are not ready to have that meeting. That was specifically to discuss the policies, the goals and policies from OC 2040, and they are still in the process of discussing it. So you don't need to be available for a joint meeting that night, so.
Okay.
Do you have another date?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
No.
Yeah, the city commission, they didn't have any really clear direction on what they wanted in their next meeting, did they? So I don't know how they can move on to the next step if they don't know what the current step is, so. Okay, any communications from any of the commissioners? Okay, I think we're adjourned.